Good morning. This is the YAHOWAH blog. This will be episode 6 of Harvest. If you don't already have one, pour yourself a cup of coffee this morning and join me as we explore even more information related to the purpose and timing of this upcoming Shabuah harvest. And where I'd like to begin is by providing a bit of a reintroduction to the material we were considering in part 5 of the Shabuah harvest, which was a criticism of Eusebius's addition to the Christian New Testament, particularly in the book of Mark and of Matthew, replaying different variations of the same theme, where we read that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And of course, upon this rock, I will build my church, being the response. The reason that this is important, and the reason we are diverting momentarily from the text of the Torah as it relates to Shabuah, is because I think there are two issues here which have long precluded understanding of the intent of the Shabuah harvest, and also have been devastating to God's people, fully appreciating the actual Messiah and Son of God. You see, I don't think the Shabuah harvest's primary intent is as a reward or some kind of a ingathering just to celebrate life in the covenant family with Yahweh. I think that Shabuah, first of all, is a direct result of Pesach, Matzah, and Bakodim. And that this harvest's primary purpose is to spare and prepare a audience, if you will, for the most important day on Yahweh's calendar, Yom Kippurim, when he returns with the Mashiach and his son, our Savior, the one who fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bakodim, Dod David. And so the best way for God to spare this group of people and to make certain that they are in attendance at the Day of Days is for this harvest to occur. And the only way to be part of those who are ingathered on this day is to know what has occurred and how it was fulfilled as you turn back the clock and you look at what Dod did in 33 CE, 4000 Yah, by carrying the burden of opening life's door, perfecting our souls by carrying our guilt into Sheol on Matzah, and then signing our adoption papers into God's family on Bakodim. So these are related issues, and they all still surround the two jobs that Yahweh is most interested in fulfilling. One is that of his beloved Son, our former and returning King, fulfilling the first three Mikra, making the fourth possible, and being there with him to celebrate the most important, which is Yom Kippurim. And the very realization that God has a son, that we have a Messiah, and that we actually have a man who served to save us by reconciling our relationship with God. All of which was robbed, plundered by Paul, Peter, and the Christian church. And because they did this, the truth has been hidden from God's people. And so the job not only entails what a recognition of what Dod has done and his acclaim for having done so, but it also pertains to the role that I've been asked to play, to bring your attention to these things, to be the first person in human history to make these things known, which are essential to God's people in the proper time, so that they can capitalize, and we have a productive and fruitful Shabuah harvest, so that there are a spared and prepared remnant of God's people celebrating Yom Kippurim and who will benefit from Teruah. These things go hand in hand, and that is why we are here, and that's why we are now examining the most devastating and deceitful line probably ever written in the name of religion. It is Bishop Eusebius, who had two roles. One, he served as Constantine's propagandist. He is the person that created the lie that Constantine saw a vision of a cross superimposed in front of his God, the sun, and heard a voice say, "Under this sign, conquer." And that was the beginning of the conversion of Constantine to Christianity, and therefore the conversion of Imperial Rome to the Roman Catholic Church. Never occurred. And Eusebius is the author of that myth. Constantine never even converted. And the conversion between Imperial Rome and Roman Catholicism took place under Theodosius in 400 CE. That second role of Eusebius under Constantine's order was to come up with an approved text for the emerging Christian religion. And the issue was that there were as many texts as there were codices and manuscripts. They all differed, and they differed materially, and largely because it was all spurious anyway. The realization that most people miss is that the so-called scriptures of the Christian church don't begin with Matthew. Matthew wasn't written until sometime between 90 and 95 CE by an impostor. A man who wrote it was not Matthew, and it was falsely attributed to one of the misnomers and crude counterfeits disciples. And even that is disproven by the other so-called gospels. And the book of Matthew is nothing but an exercise in plagiarism. And I don't know if you call it plagiarism when you steal from three sources, or if that's called research, but not giving the original authors credit for their work makes it plagiarism regardless. Some 95 to 98% of Matthew comes from three sources. Mark, who was the first to write a supposed history of the mythical misnomer Jesus. Luke, which collectively between the two is about 80% of the book of Matthew, just pilfered and put together from those two sources. Luke was nothing but Paul's propagandist and his healer. Mark was somebody that Paul recruited for this particular mission. Neither were eyewitnesses. Neither were anywhere close to Jerusalem when Dode actually fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bokodim. And the third source that comprises the remaining 15% or so of the book of Matthew was written by the Ebionites, which were Jews who recorded what Dode, as the Messiah and Son of God, said on a number of occasions, particularly his Sermon on the Mount and the Olivet Discourse, and recorded that in Hebrew, and it became the remainder of that gospel. But no, Matthew was not written first. It was written in between 90, compiled, not really written. It was an act of plagiarism in between 90 and 95 CE. The first 14 documents that became part of the Christian New Testament were all written by Paul. The first was written in 52 CE. It's the book of Galatians. That's why I made Galatians a instrumental object of study in my book, Twistianity, which tears it apart. There's nothing in Galatians which is true. But it establishes the foundation of this religion that Paul wanted to be the lone apostle to the world to provide. And it is in Galatians that the mythos of a Iousu Christou is first positioned. The remaining 13 letters that comprise the 14 that Paul wrote all followed up to around 66 CE when Paul died alone and miserable, including his love letters to his boy toy, Timothy. These were the first 14 letters. The book of Mark was specifically written to provide a narrative under which Paul's letters could be read and understood. And he was recruited by his own admission, by Paul's own admission, to accomplish this very task. Then Luke, as Paul's personal healer and publicist, as well as his propagandist, wrote Luke, based largely on what he had heard Mark say, but adding embellishments that take the book of Luke into the fairy tale land of, similar to Odysseus's Odyssey. This then is followed by Luke's letter, who was not anywhere near Jerusalem again, was not an eyewitness. His triumphing of Paul's great acclaim, very little of which is historically accurate. This then was cobbled together to create the Christian New Testament. The book of John, we have no idea in the world who wrote it. Very unlikely a person named John, or Yahuwah, as the case may be, because first evidence of it is around 90 to 95 CE, along the time of Matthew. If he had been 30-ish at the time of Dode being in Jerusalem in 33 CE, and you add the 60 years to get to 90 CE, he's so far beyond the average lifespan at 90-year-olds as a 90-year-old, it's essentially ridiculous. And of course, then this leads you to the revelation of supposedly Yahuwah, which would have had him be, closer to 100 by the time it was written. And the fact is that the first parts of it had to be cobbled together before the temple was torn down, or it most certainly would have been mentioned in 69. And so there again is a zero possibility that it was written by an actual disciple. And you look at the book of Revelation, all it is it's plagiarized. It is paraphrased from real and fake prophets. The most cited book paraphrased from is Ezekiel, which fails every test of a prophet as delineated in the Torah in Devarim 18. So you get some idea of how the lies then that these letters and these tomes, out of order, were cobbled together to create this Christian New Testament. And we now have 69 manuscripts dating prior to Constantine, and they differ wildly from one another. But the reason we cut off research on older manuscripts at Constantine's edict that made Christianity legal in the Roman Empire is from that point on, the scribes just went wild and they would write anything they wanted. And there's almost no correlation now between the earliest texts and those. So unlike the Hebrew text of the Torah, prophets, and Psalms, which is meticulously maintained, and we have copious evidences of that going all the way back to texts that date to, the time of the Exodus, and 1448 BCE, within 40 years of that date, we actually have written texts that have been discovered, written in Hebrew, that corroborate the text of the Torah. And then, of course, the Dead Sea Scrolls date anywhere from about 375 BCE all the way through about 65 to 70-ish CE, some maybe just ever so slightly after that. And they are consistent to the extent of about 85%. And 85% consistency with the Masoretic text includes variations of things like pronouns and conjugations and stems, of various presentations of verbs, and things of this nature, which don't have much substance in terms of their divergence from the account. And of course, there are those that are deliberate copy edits by the rabbis, which we can now correct through the Dead Sea Scrolls. But you have about an 85% correlation, maybe slightly higher than that. And with the Dead Sea Scrolls, you can get the original text, particularly scrubbed with the diacritical markings, back up to probably 95 to or so consistent with the original autograph. It's not even remotely the case of the Christian New Testament. In fact, by the time that you get to the Textus Receptus, which was considered the perfect rendering of the Christian New Testament, you had some, I guess about 200,000 known variances, which is more than there are words in the text. So it's this idea of a well-maintained and properly ordered Christian New Testament being written by an eyewitness to the events. There's nothing of that. Now, the reason we talk about this is because the text as it is presented in the Christian New Testament was managed by Eusebius on direct orders of Constantine. And we have the orders from Constantine, and we see Eusebius's hand in it. The two primary documents that tell us what he added and how he arranged the material are found in the Codex Vaticanus and the Codex Sinaiticus, which today, of course, have been rewritten hundreds and hundreds of times to try to solve problems and resolve contradictions throughout the text. But it is those that add many elements to the Christian New Testament that are just not attributed in any way, shape, or form in any of the manuscripts dating to the early 2nd through early 4th century. And so they're all fall directly at Eusebius's hand, for he is the one who had access, means, motive, and clearly is the one who added the most devastating line in the Christian New Testament as it relates to negating what Yahowah achieved through Dowd, the actual Messiah and Son of God. It is that line that was presented before the gates of hell, of the cave of Pan, the satyr god of Greek mythology. The reason that we moved into this particular review of the text in the middle of our Shabuah presentation is in the Shabuah presentation, we are asked to prepare two satyr, two of these goats that are now integrated into Greek mythology. And the home of the satyr is Mount Harmon. It is a cave there. It's called the Gates of Hell in Greek mythology. Lots of statues there, lots of worship there going through the ages, both by the Greeks, the Romans, even by Jews at various times, certainly by Herod. And so we went through the history of that place because it's really important. It speaks of how Yahowah's instructions regarding Shabuah have been corrupted for it to be counterfeited onto the Christian myth. And Shavuot is the only one of 7 of Yahweh's Moed Mikre that was incorporated into the new religion. They rename it as Pentecost, meaning 50, and present it as the birth of their church. So in presenting the Shavuot harvest, we will have to undermine the credibility of Pentecost because it has nothing to do with Christianity. And because of the mention of the Seder and their incorporation into Greek mythology, which was incorporated by Eusebius into the Christian text, and where he wrote this declaration which legitimizes Christianity. Without it, there is no Christ. Literally, there is no Christ. None. There is absolutely no reason whatsoever for calling this misnomer Iusus, Iusun, Iusu a Christos. None. This is the only place that it is allegedly stated. And even here, when it is stated, the misnomer as Jesus says, don't tell anybody. And we have absolute proof that it did not exist. The conversation never took place, and that it was added by Eusebius in the mid-4th century. So it's really important to clear away this muck, because it was by robbing Dowd of his title of Messiah and Son of God that Christianity was able to pile their religious junk right on top of the truth and delude Jews up to this day of embracing this important truth and therefore capitalizing on the Shavuot harvest. So this line, as I've shared, the only place that you find the Christian counterfeit of the Messiah called Jesus Christ, robbing Dowd of his titles of Mashiach, Messiah, and Ben El, Son of God, is in front of this cave of Pan, the satyr, and directly related to the gates of hell, which were integrated into the text of the Christian New Testament. And when we realized that it was never stated and it was added by Eusebius, we recognized there can be no chair of St. Peter, because he is not the rock, nor the first pope upon which a church would be built. There are no keys to heaven held by the Roman institution. It all crumbles behind the facade crafted by Eusebius and his deceptive pen, and the propensity of Christians to believe that which is easily disproven. And since we have mentioned Josephus's name, the only independent, quasi-independent reference to a person even remotely related to a Jesus written by anybody outside of this gaggle of frauds now memorialized in the Christian New Testament is allegedly by Josephus. And yet, guess who had exclusive access to the only extant copy of Eusebius's manuscript? You see, he was working for Constantine, who was ruling the Roman world. And Josephus had become a traitor and writing his histories for Rome. And the only person who had access to that manuscript was Eusebius. And so it is his efforts that changed it, to give at first a passing notion that there was a person under this name, and then a fictitious tale of someone who never existed, John the Baptist, but they got the story all butchered. And then later on, he tried to augment his augmentation and add this long diatribe, which every scholar in the world knows is a total and complete fake. We need to peel back what he did so that the truth is now open and available for Israel to see, because it is essential they embrace Dod as the actual Messiah and Son of God who fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bakodim. Now, as evidence of this, not a word of what Eusebius composed on behalf of the Roman Catholic Church and his overlords actually appears in Matthew 16 or Mark 8, that is found in any of the 69 pre-Constantine codices. That's a lot of codices containing portions of the Christian New Testament. Not one, ever. The earliest evidence of the Gospel of Matthew and Mark is Papyrus 45, as I shared in our last program. It was written around 250 CE. So that's the earliest extant evidence of either of these two books, 250 CE, over 2 centuries after these events took place in Jerusalem. And of course, it was written in Alexandria, Egypt, not in Yehudah. It contains the text of Matthew's chapters 20 and 21, 25, 26, along with portions of Mark 4 through 9, 11 and 12, Luke 6 and 7, 9 and 14, John chapters 4 and 5, 10 and 11, and Acts chapters 4 through 17. And thus, of course, not a single word from the 16th chapter of Matthew, thereby excluding the religion's most essential citation. As for Mark 8, Papyrus 45 contains chapter 8, verse 1, and verses 14 through 25. Remember that number. And then it starts up again in 34 through 40. But nothing of the narrative that Eusebius sandwiched between, which conveniently starts with verse 26. Ruh-roh. This is what Eusebius wrote. It's found now in Mark 8, 27 through 30, but not attested in any manuscript prior to Constantine and Eusebius. Jesus and his followers went from there to the towns of Caesarea-Philippi. As I shared in the last program, there was never a town, much less towns, of Caesarea-Philippi. Didn't exist. Caesarea-Pania, yes. But Pania is a reference to Pan, the satyr of the Greek mythology of this goat man that was the devilish character that guarded the gates of hell. Oops. As they went, he asked his followers. Why would he have followers, by the way? I thought, he had disciples. Why would he have followers? When Dode wrote the only eyewitness account of what actually occurred on Pesach, Matzah, and Bakodim, it's in his 22nd Mizmor song, and he did it again in the 88th. And then when Yeshaya explained it to us in the 53rd chapter of his prophetic text under Isaiah 53, was there any mention of followers? Just curious. Who do people say I am? Why would he ask that question? I mean, think it through. Why would anyone? If you know who you are, you've told me. At this point, he would have allegedly been with these followers for 3 years. How is it even remotely rational that he would now be asking them, after spending 3 years with them, who do people say I am? I mean, come on. He's been with them for 3 years. Allegedly, he had ears. Why wouldn't he hear what they heard? Why would they have heard anything he didn't hear, since they were supposed to be together night and day all this time? What a stupid question. They answered. They. Anytime you hear they as opposed to he answered or so-and-so answered, people don't come out and say in unison, okay, the script says. Some say John the Baptist. Yeah, no one said John the Baptist. None. Why? And think about how stupid that would be. First of all, there were no Baptists back in the first century. Baptizing is part of the Sibylline oracles that were incorporated into Christianity. It was the religion of the Roman Senate. No, there was no Baptists. And how could he have been John the Baptist when, according to Christian legend, John the Baptist lost his head? If he was John the Baptist, his head's on a plate someplace. So, I mean, Eusebius, this is really stupid. I mean, this reminds me, we did a program yesterday on Adam's answers as to why did you do this when he was confronted by God, and he gave the three lamest excuses in the history of excuses. Well, Eusebius did him one better. Some say you're John the Baptist. Some say you're Elijah. If he's Elijah, why didn't he call himself Elijah? Elijah's got a really good name. If he is Elijah, then why did he call himself that? Why isn't there a prophecy that has Elijah coming back in the 4th century? Because the only prophecy that has Elijah coming back was written by Malachi. It's the very last chapter towards the very end of Malachi's revelation. And he's coming back as part of two witnesses that are called to preclude the earth being destroyed, because their job is to acquaint Israel with Yahweh's name, with what his son has accomplished in fulfilling Pesach and Matzah and Bikurim, as well as his return on Yom Kippurim. It can't be Elijah. Man, think it through. What is Elijah's famous act? He's got one. One. What was it? He went against and denounced and then killed the political and religious establishment of Israel. What did Paul write in the 13th chapter of Romans? That all governments, including Rome, were godly and established for you to obey. Well, of course, total BS, but... And what is Christianity if it's not a religion? And the two religious cults that Eliah went off against were the cult of the Lord, and of course the Lord is totally and completely incorporated into Christianity, so can't be that. And the other one was Asherah, and Asherah has also been brought wholesale into Christianity. That's the mother of God, the Madonna and Child, the Queen of Heaven. So, no. Eliah, if you were to go through the Torah and prophets and pick the dumbest answer for what is attributed to the Christian Jesus, it would be Eliah. Plus, you read Jesus's alleged soliloquy, his approach and Eliah's, I mean, they aren't even remotely similar. The Jesus of Christianity is a parable weaver. He is a storyteller. And Elias, sharp as a tack, man, he is a hoot. He is sarcastic. And he is exceedingly condemning of religion and politics. And he speaks on behalf of YAHOWAH, which never attributed to the Christian Jesus. Others say you were one of the early preachers. There were no early preachers. Christianity doesn't have, Judaism doesn't have preachers. And not only doesn't Judaism have preachers, YAHOWAH doesn't have any preachers. YAHOWAH has prophets, he has witnesses. He doesn't have preachers. There were no other early preachers. I mean, Where did Eusebius get his education? Romper room? I mean, I know that's an old show. Does it go back all the way to that period? How did the Roman Catholic Church choose its bishops? No. I mean, so you've already started here. You've got it taking place in a place that does not exist by that name. And it actually is the gates of hell, the cave of the satyr of Greek mythology, the entrance into hell. And it begins by asking a question that could never have been asked, and then providing three answers, which are all three totally and completely ludicrous. And this is the basis of Christ, Christianity, and church. Without this, they all go poof. The greatest lie ever sold. But he didn't say wrong. Means he wasn't very bright. But what about you, he asked. Who do you say I am? Not you. Bang, 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 bang. Oh, come on. It's when I wrote Twistianity, it was hard to not just say, how could you be so blankety blank stupid? I mean, the whole thing is just so ludicrous. You just want to scream and say, how in the world can there be billions of people who believe this nonsense? You know, he'd been with these fellows for 3 years. You don't think he identified himself in 3 years? I mean, how could he have followers? How could he have disciples, which means those are learners, and they learn nothing? What were they doing? Just going off, walking town to town, having a swell time? What were they doing? How could you recruit somebody to be a follower when you haven't even told them who you are? This is the dumbest, well, I can't say it's the dumbest religion ever conceived, because we have got Mormonism and Scientology and Islam. But it's up there. Who do you say I am? Oh, Peter answered. Now, by the way, he couldn't have been Peter. This is one of the problems when you put stuff in where it doesn't fit. Because he wouldn't become Peter, which is a crude transliteration of the Greek word for rock, Petra, until after this declaration. So, come on, folks, think it through. His name was Shimon, according to all of the written accounts. I mean, after all, he was Paul's primary rival. Paul knew his name. In fact, Paul wasn't even Paul's name. Oh, his name was Shaul. I'll tell you what, Yahowah knew his name, because he wrote the prophetic book of Habakkuk to condemn him by name, calling Shaul the plague of death. But as we're here, Peter could not have answered, because there was no Peter. He doesn't become Petra until this statement. God, what a bunch of nincompoops. You are the Christ. Now, where would he get that? Where would he get that? There's no reference to a Christ in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. Zero. Not one. Goose egg. How could you say you are the Christ? It's impossible. First of all, he didn't speak Greek. But beyond that little problem, and of course he didn't speak English either, on that little problem, how could he say you are the Christ when there is absolutely no reference whatsoever to a Christ anywhere found in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms?
Pam told him.
Hi. Peanut gallery over there. Well, not a peanut gallery. She's pretty cute. Said Pan told him. The Satar. Okay, that might be true. There is a Mashiach, but he didn't say Mashiach. And the religion's not named Mashiach. The Mashiachians. I'm a Mashiach. Jeebus the Mashiach. No. Okay. There are references to a anointed Mashiach. I will tell you that. One person who was anointed happened to be Cyrus, who was a egomaniac pagan who pretended that he was God. But Yahweh had a purpose for using him, so he anointed him for that task. So he's probably not Cyrus. Yeah. He wouldn't have got it from there. So who is the man that Yahweh anointed 3 times and spoke of even a 4th anointing with his own oil, but ordered him initially anointed at 8 years old and had his primary prophet and judge, Shamuel, do it? Dode. What does the 89th Mizmor say is Yahweh's Mashiach? Dode. So, if they wanted to say, I think you're the second coming of Dode, hey, you got a winner. And if they want to say, as Dode David, you are the Mashiach, winner, chicken dinner. You got it there. Nicely done. But to say you're the Christ, nah. Okay, so the proof text for Christianity happens to be Daniel 9, where it says that the anointed, a Mashiach, is going to arrive in what is 33 CE on our Roman Catholic calendars, year 4000 Yah. The date is established 600 years in advance by Dode giving us a very specific timeline to the point that he's going to return. And we've done the math. But the person speaking, Gabriel, is God's most competent and capable man. He's even introduced twice as a man. He's Dode. He is the Messiah. He's the one telling us what he is going to do and when he's going to do it and what the consequence will be. And he wrote all about it in the 22nd and 88th Mizmor. And he discussed his decision to do it and God's approval in each of the first 30 of his Mizmor Psalms. So, unless he's Dode, which would have been, by the way, if this conversation had actually taken place, it would have actually been Dode, and then the title Mashiach would have applied. But since Christianity says Dode is dead and buried, doesn't work. Therefore, there is no basis whatsoever for the claim. The claim is retrofit back into the text so that there is a basis for Paul's letters. That's it. Could never have been said. I mean, literally, impossible for those words to have come out of Shimon's renamed Peter's mouth. And should you be so naive to think it is possible, then you would have to wonder why your counterfeit God, your Iesu Christou, was so derelict in his duty and never mentioned who he was in the first 3.5 years, why he would have disciples, why he would have followers, if he never once mentioned who he was. It is to believe it, you'd have to either be completely ignorant, completely irrational, or just don't give a crap because faith trumps all. But this needs to be exposed. It needs to be mocked. I'm doing it in the style of Elias, since he was mentioned, because it is these lies that preclude God's people, Yisrael, Yehudim, whom I have been asked to awaken. It has precluded them from knowing the truth because this rubbish was piled right on top of the most profoundly important discovery in human history. That Dode David is the Messiah, that Dode David is the Son of God, that Dode David is the returning king of Yisrael, and that Dode David fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bakorim. in 33 CE, year 4000 Yah, and that it is David who makes this Shabuah harvest possible and who is returning on Yom Kippurim in year 6000 Yah, which is 2033. That is the single most important discovery in human history, and it is this lie which precludes God's people from seeing it, along with the lie of the founder of Rabbinic Judaism, Rabbi Akiba, who, rather than point out the obvious truth, covered it over with a lie of his own and foisted another false Messiah on God's people, Bar Kokhba, the son of a star, from which now Israelis wrap themselves in that star. Something to think about, ladies and gentlemen. How you've been played for fools, and how there is very little time left for you to know and accept the truth. Peter answered, "You are the Christ." He didn't say, "Hey, good job. Attaway, you're right. That's who I am. What was your first clue, Sherlock?" No, he didn't say that, did he? You know what he said? But Jesus, nobody by that name lived in the first century. In fact, no one by that name lived until the 17th century. Warned, strictly charging them that they should tell no one of him. Just when you thought that stupid had reached the epitome and the grand crescendo of foolish, Eusebius trips on his tongue again. Strictly warned them, charging them they should tell no one about him. What in the hell is the Christian New Testament then? What in the hell is the Christian religion? What are the purpose of evangelists? Why does the church exist? First of all, the conversation never took place. But if we are stupid enough to believe that it did, why would you speak of a Jesus Christ? Would you call yourself a Christian? Would you go to church? If the alleged character said, "Don't tell anyone," my strict warning, don't tell anybody. Mark 8:27 through 30th, and underneath that lie, the truth is hidden. Not only is this line devastating to the Christian myth, it appears nowhere prior to Eusebius's 4th century codexes Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. Moreover, Eusebius made a number of very careless mistakes, adding additional commentary to the text of Matthew when it was concocted, allegedly, 2 or 3 decades after Mark's hearsay account by an impostor. Unknown and unwritten information is always lost over time. It is never gained. We know that the Mark, who is accredited the book of Mark, and who wrote prior to Luke, neither one were eyewitnesses. Neither one were anywhere near these events as they took place. Neither one were inspired. Neither one presents an accurate account of what transpired. But Mark would have been written sometime around 70 to 75 CE, 20 years before Matthew, a full generation. And as should be obvious to anybody playing with their brain, unwritten information is always lost over time, never gained. It's the reason why Yahweh told his prophets to write everything down. Unwritten information always is lost over time, never gained. Play the children's game of telephone, where you go around the circle, and there's a single sentence that is whispered in the ear of the first child. They pass it from mouth to ear around the circle, and by the time it comes out, it might have 10% of what the original message was in common, and it's just a farce. Oh, that's what happens particularly if you play the game, not over 60 seconds, but over centuries, and in this case, decades. Nevertheless, in the narrative Eusebius composed to justify Christianity, in the Gospel of Matthew, he picked up where he left off at the gates of hell and then became a novelist. It is, Jesus came to the country of Qatsyr-Philippi. Again, there was no country of Qatsyr-Philippi, Caesarea, named after Julius Caesar, by a king named Philip. The area was actually the Caesarea of Pan and Pania, because this was the home of the satyr god of Greek mythology that guarded the gates of hell. So Jesus came to the, and by the way, this idea of naming places, towns that never existed is germane to the Christian myth. The worst happens to also be a fraud perpetrated by Eusebius on behalf of Constantine's mommy. When she went to the Holy Land, she determined that Jesus came from Nazareth. The problem with that, of course, is that Nazareth didn't exist in the first century. A town by a different name had existed there, but it had gone away. There was no even remnant of that town 200 years prior or 100 years after Dode lived in the second life in the first century of the Christian era. Yeah, oopsie. So anyway, he asked his followers, "Who do people say I am?" Who do people say that I, excuse me, so it's a different question now. Who do people say that I, the Son of Man, am? Now, there's a little bit of a problem here with the Son of Man. So sorry. Where's the title Son of Man come from? Do you know? Where does the title Son of Man, and it's Ben Adam, where is it used? Hundreds of times. Oh, not in the garden. The book of Ezekiel. The book that I was asked to diligently disprove. The book that serves as Satan's autobiography. Ezekiel is referred to as the son of Adam, the son of man, over and over again by his Lord. And his Lord is Satan. And if you don't think so, read the 2 volumes, Volume 2 and Volume 3 of Babel. In fact, while you're at it, read Volume 1 so you know what Gabriel, God's most competent and courageous man, Dode, told us about his arrival to fulfill Pesach, Matzah, and Bakorim. So, Son of Man, bad answer. It tells you that you are part of the playbook of Satan himself, because it is Satan that inspired the book of Ezekiel. Who did people say that I, the Son of Man, am? Now, again, he's been with them for 3 years. And he says now that the term that he has used to identify himself as Son of Man, whom among them wouldn't have been the Son of Man? Who in the entire world at that point wouldn't have been the Son of Man? Wouldn't that apply to everybody? So why would he refer to himself by a title that would refer to everybody? How would that title make him in any way distinct? And if he was the Son of Man, oh, by the way, guess what? Bing, bing, bing. Can you figure it out? What could he not have been if he was the Son of Man? No, not the Messiah. He couldn't have been born of a virgin. If he was the Son of Man, he could not have been born of a virgin. God, I tell you, if it wasn't for Scientology and Mormonism and Islam, Christianity, hands down, would win the prize for world's dumbest religion. He can't be the Son of Man and be born of a virgin. Therefore, he can't be the Son of God. These idiots just don't think it through. Logic was obviously not a course taught in school at that time. Oh, who do people say that I, Son of Man, am? They said, some said that you are John the Baptist. Again, John the Baptist, head on a plate, deader than dead. Can't be him, right? So why would you even mention it? And oh, by the way, of course, as I mentioned, there were no Baptists. Not one. Baptism, part of the Sibylline oracles, part of the government of Rome. Nope, not John the Baptist. Some say Elijah. Remember, Elijah's the man known for one thing, repudiating the integration between politics and religion, particularly in Israel. Politics and religion. He went against the Lord, who is integrated into Christianity, and he went against Asherah, the mother of God, queen of heaven, the mother spirit of the Babylonian religion that got integrated into the Canaanite religion and the Phoenician religion that was promoted by Jezebel. So the last person he could have been, the person who would have repeated his sarcastic denunciation of everything that Christianity stands for, is Eliah. Nope, not Eliah. And now, rather than throwing in another name just for giggles, the preachers of old, he's had more time to think about. Oh, no, he is still going to throw in preachers. He throws in a new name, Jeremiah. Where does it say that Jeremiah is coming back? The only reason you could ever mention Jeremiah is because unthinking Christians think that Jeremiah spoke of their New Testament. But if you read the 31st chapter of Yirmiah, by the way, which has Yahweh's name in it, which they never mention, of course. What does the 31st chapter of Yirmiah say about the restoration of the covenant? It says it'll be made with Yisrael and Yehudah, not with no stinking Goyim Gentile church. And what does he say is the difference between how the covenant was portrayed to Israel during the Exodus, where God dragged them out of Mitzrayim, kicking and screaming with a firm hand, and how it will be reaffirmed when Yahweh returns to them. The difference is that the Torah, rather than being an external document written by the hand of Moshe that they can choose to read or ignore, or in the case of the Talmud or New Testament, pervert willy-nilly, is being integrated inside of us. So if you read that discussion, the first thing you come to realize is it can't be Jeremiah, because Jeremiah denounced even the remotest possibility that there could be a New Testament. Good grief, these people don't think. Or one of the early preachers. There were no early preachers. He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Shimon Peter this time. He added the Shimon. The Peter, of course, is too early for that, but what the heck? Well, we don't get tripped up over the details, right? Just because he doesn't have his chronology right doesn't mean the rest of it's not true. Just because everything he said so far has been dunderheaded doesn't mean that the rest is dunderheaded, does it? Peter says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Now, we've already gone through, he cannot be the Christ. There is no basis for saying that anywhere ever. Pulled literally out of the thin air or out of Pan's mouth, that the case may be. None. And the Son of the living God, he can't be the Son of the living God if he is the Son of man. And that was how he described himself according to this same text. 0 for 2. Jesus, there was no Jesus until the 17th century, said to him, Shimon, son of Yonah. Oh. Yonah is another one of those books. If you apply Yahweh's Devarim 18 test, which Yahweh told us that if you want to know if a prophet is speaking for me or for a false god, you apply this particular test. I think it has 6 codicils in it, and if that person doesn't meet all 6 of these conditions, then he is a false prophet. He is deadly. There is no part of it that the book of Yoel meets. Or excuse me, Yonah. Not a single part of it the book of Yonah meets. It is as spurious as is the book of Esther, as spurious as the book of Ezekiel. They failed the test miserably. The first 6 chapters of Daniel, same thing. I mean, it's not even close. The book of Job, complete washout. God gave us the test to apply to know who was speaking for him or not, and the first rabbis didn't pay any attention to it, and they glommed together books that should never have been part of the collection for us to read. So he could not have called him Shimon, son of Yonah, because he would have known, Dode particularly would have known that Yonah was a false prophet. You are happy. You are happy, and you're happy and you know it. Clap your hands. Because you did not learn this from man. Well, it's for damn sure he didn't learn it from Jesus, because, of course, Jesus never existed. But if Jesus did exist, he was a really rotten teacher, because he just admitted that the Son of Man didn't teach him this. My Father in heaven, whose name he does not know. And by the way, the only person that Yahweh says, he is my son, I am his father, is Dode again. Yahweh never says, Jesus is my son. He never even mentions the name Jesus. Oops. My Father in heaven has shown you this. Not me, by the way. I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm going to take an exit stage left. No purpose of me being here. I'm not telling you anything that's worthwhile anyway. And I tell you that you are Peter. You are Petra. You are rock. I'm sorry about that. I'm the rocky crag. That's why Moshe was retired after he didn't follow Yahweh's advice, where Yahweh asked him to speak of the rock, not whack it. There are lots of prophecies, including in Yeshaya, that speaks of the role of the rocky crag. Oh, by the way, that happens to be my first name. Satan has had it out for me for a long time, because I am Dode's herald, because I am Yahweh's voice. On this rock, I will build my church. Well, there's a little problem here too, Tessa. Everything he said so far is a lie, but that's not the biggest problem. There is no word even remotely akin to church found anywhere, not only in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. Nowhere does Yahweh say, I can't wait to build myself a church. That's what we need. We need some churches out there. In fact, when people build houses of God, what does Yahweh said? Hey, even once in all of the time that I was with the children of Israel, did I ever ask them to build me a home? Ever once? No. But there's no word even wildly close to church the Christian New Testament. The Greek word that is now put here for some unknown Hebrew word, because they would have had this conversation if these people actually existed in Hebrew. The Greek word now that is translating it, mythical conversation, is ekklesia. Ek means out. Ecclesia means to call. Out call? I'm familiar with some out call things. Out call pizza, out call prostitutes, I think, too. But out call. But here is a specific name, a church. There's no Greek word that even sounds like church, unless you look at a Germanic word, church. Church is the closest thing there is to church. And church as a Germanic word, and would have been known, of course, by Eusebius as a Germanic word, because they were battling the Germanic tribes. Hadrian and others were up doing battle with them. The daughter of the horned one, that was the god of these people, and it was also of the sun god. The daughter was named Church. Church is what we get the English word circle from, and circle as in the sun and as in halos. So the closest analog to church would be Church, which is the name of a pagan sun goddess. Not good. And there's no way to get the transliteration or the translation of church from the Greek text. Completely made up. You don't have a Christ. You don't have a God. You don't have any Christianity. You don't have any Christians. And you don't have any church. The powers of hell. By the way, hell doesn't have any powers. Hell is a prison. It's actually called Sheol. It's akin to a black hole. It has no hands. It has no power. It has no influence. It is a place of separation from Yahowah. So it has no influence. So no power. And it is named Sheol, not Hades. Hades is part of the Greek religion. Will not be able to have power over my church. Well, funny thing, when the person impersonating John wrote the book of Revelation, the only part of the book of Revelation that is not paraphrased from prophets and non-prophets is the opening letters to the church and the spirit of those churches. And the first 5 of them are all under satanic influence. So how can they all be under satanic influence? Overtly under satanic influence. Jezebelian. If the gates of hell, power of hell, can have no influence over it. And they're standing right in front of the gates of hell. But they're contriving this whole conversation. I will give you the keys of a holy nation of heaven. Heaven's not a nation. It's a home. There are no keys to it. I gave a couple of places in the book of Yeshayah where there is the mention of a key, but it ain't the key to heaven. And these clowns most certainly don't have it. If there were a key to heaven, it'd be the one that unlocks heaven's door. And that key is David, the actual Messiah and Son of God. They didn't get anything right. And it's so easily disproven. Whatever you do not allow on earth will not be allowed in heaven. Bull, stupid. Whatever you do not allow on earth. What influence did this numbskull, Shimon, who is the same numbskull that converts Shabuah into Pentecost and then misquotes everything to justify it. I mean, makes an utter and complete arse of himself in the process. What is it that he was able to not allow on earth? How did earth change precipitously based upon Peter? Nothing. And you think that Peter was the great disallower? And do you think that what is disallowed on earth affects heaven? I mean, heaven is where Yahweh is. What he wants to happen in heaven and what he doesn't want to happen there is totally his choice. It is never allocated to a man. He loves his son Dode more than anyone. Dode doesn't even get to decide what happens in heaven. Dode gets to decide what happens here on earth. These people are so stinking stupid. Will not be allowed in heaven. Whatever you allow on earth will be allowed in heaven. Well, what did Christianity do? It condemned God's people. It said that all the promises made to David would be given to this mythical misnomer and crude counterfeit, Jesus, now the Christ. That all of the promises made to Israel and to Yehudim would be transferred to Gentiles and their church. And that church would go on to persecute God's people, to harass them, to murder them, to rob them, to plunder them, to abuse them. So you think that's what's going on in heaven? Is that Jews are abused? Well, how's that even possible when you say that Jews can't go to heaven because you've replaced them? No. This is preposterous. Then with strong words, he told his followers, tell no one that he was the Christ. On a 1 to 10 scale of stupid, this is a 10,000. It is so blatantly fraudulent. It's amazing that Christians are so easily duped. Matthew 16, 13 through 20, as written by Bishop Eusebius. Well, that's going to be the conclusion of this episode of our harvest. I'm glad that we have cleared away some of the muck. We will rejoin this in our family hour this evening, where we will take off from this point and continue to push away all of the rubbish, religious rubbish, that has been piled upon the truth, so that God's people, Yisrael and Yehudim, might embrace it, and they would come to fulfill the promises of Yirmiyah 31 as God inscribed them, and come to embrace their returning King, the Messiah and Son of God, David. This has been an episode of the YAHOWAH blog. Thank you for listening.